His name in Hebrew means vapor or breath. He was the first man to be called the man of faith. Unfortunately, he's also the first man to die, and he was murdered by his own brother. Sad and tragic story of siblings in rivalry or fighting, and even to the point of killing. He is actually the first man to be called righteous in the scripture, and today we will learn, because he's also the first man to offer a sacrifice that is acceptable to God. Probably you have guessed already that the person I'm talking about is the second son of Adam and Eve. First son is Cain, the second one is Abel or Abel. And the full story of Abel or Abel is found in Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 to 16. And you can read it at home tonight and turn it there and see the full detail, the panoramic view of the story of Abel and the tragic story that happened after their offering and worship to God. But let me fast forward and let's go to Hebrews in the New Testament and see how the life of this person was described. And then later on, we'll go back to the detail of the story. So let me read Hebrews 11, verse 4. This is how the New Testament writer described the life and contribution and how he was commended because of his faith. From the NIV version, it says, by faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, he still speaks, even though he is dead. If you're taking notes, the title of our sharing this afternoon is The Acceptable Faith of Abel or Abel. We will find out this afternoon why his faith and his offerings were accepted by God, and why, on the other hand, the offering and the life of his brother Cain was not accepted. So how many of us have experienced being rejected or somehow accepted? Probably you were applying on something and you have done your part, you have done your homework, you have filled up the form, everything is okay, only to find out that your application is not accepted. And somehow we wonder, what went wrong? What was the mistake? And we always think, what's the basis of acceptance? And what's the basis of rejection, if we may say? Now, in the book of Hebrews 11, verse 4, it was revealed to us, although it was hidden in the Old Testament in Genesis chapter 4, but it is clearly revealed in Hebrews 11, the criteria or what matters most before God, what is the basis of the acceptability of the faith of this man by the name of Abel. So let's see. First, number one, from Hebrews 11 verse 4a, it says, by faith Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. So the author of Hebrews at the outset already revealed that Abel had faith in God. It's very important to take note that Abel started with faith. It is by faith that he offered. So what does it mean to have faith in God? No, we probably heard a lot of teaching about faith, but in Hebrews 11, the context of this, in Hebrews 11, verse 1, it was defined that faith is to be sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. And it continues in verse 6 that if anyone would come before God, he must believe that God exists and that He is the rewarder of those who earnestly or diligently seek Him. So from the context of Hebrews 11, for them faith, because Abel was commended because of his faith. Abel started with faith. He offered to God because of his faith. He had faith in God. And that faith is Abel's putting his trust and hope in the promises of God. And probably you are asking, Pastor Butch, who preached the gospel to Abel, how did he come to know about the gospel or God? And of course, Genesis chapter 1, the creation story was revealed. Genesis chapter 2, how God planted the garden. Genesis chapter 3, Adam fell to sin. And then in chapter 3, a pre-picture of what is going to happen in the future. God sacrificed an animal and gave Adam and Eve a cloth of the skin of animals. And probably this is the story where Abel and Cain were hearing from their parents the proclamation and the story being transferred to them. And later on, we will see that the response of these two boys are different. So Abel apparently put his trust and his hope in that God that these parents were describing, the God who created the heavens and the earth, and that was considered as faith. And in Hebrews 11, he was commended for that. The Bible is telling us that Abel placed his hope and trust in God and believed that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. And because Abel had faith in God, he offered. You know, in the Old Testament, when you read the Old Testament, every time the word worship is mentioned, it is always going along with an offering. That if someone is worshiping God, there is always an offering that goes alongside with it. So a person cannot worship God without offering something. Abel believed in God, Abel offered, and his offering was described as better sacrifice than that of Cain. Now let's go back to Genesis 4 to see in detail what happened here and why his offering was considered better than that of Cain. Let's see in Genesis 4, 3-5. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil because he was a farmer as an offering to the Lord. But Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. You know, after reading this, I said, is it possible that today, in our experience as Christians, we come to church Sunday after Sunday? Is it possible? I wonder, no? That when we offer something to God in worship, maybe it's in material thing, whatever we do, as part of our offering of worship to God, is it possible that some of our offerings are rejected or some are accepted? A lot of questions came to my mind on reading this, and some of the questions that I wrote here is, why did God favor Abel and his offering instead of Cain? How did Abel and Cain know which one is accepted and which one is not? Because the story tells us that after they offered, Cain felt bad. How did he know? And I asked myself, does God have preference? That He preferred the shepherds than the farmers? It looks like in the offering of Cain, he brought some of the fruits of the soil natural because he was a farmer. And I asked myself, is there something wrong with vegetables and fruits? Or maybe God is not in the mood of eating vegetable that time, that He preferred mutton or chicken or duck or whatever. It looks here that, but Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. Today, if you will interpret it today with the longevity issue and the diet thing, it looks like, God, Lord, you have chosen the wrong fat portion. Di ba? Masama sa cholesterol yan. And, di ba? Because in the Old Testament, fat portions, today we don't like the fat portions, but in the Old Testament concept of sacrifice, fat portions belongs to God. They give it to God, the best portion of the animals. So, but does God prefer engineers than architects? Is that the way God is presented here? That God prefer the nurses than the midwives? I don't think God is also looking for blood. Is our worship accepted when we see people are not in control, or does God prefer a quiet type of approach? These are questions that we will answer today, and we'll try to answer as we go back to the story of Abel and Cain. Now, the general tenor of the scripture is this. It indicates that the superior quality of Abel's offering derived from the integrity of his heart rather than from the nature of the offering itself. Now, it's very, very important for us all to catch this, that the criteria, or God is looking at the integrity of the heart. By faith, Abel offered a better sacrifice. In Genesis 4:7, we have been given a glimpse of what happened there. Implied in verse 7 of chapter 4, God was talking to Cain. It says, if you do what is right, will you not be accepted? So after the offering of Cain, and he felt, I don't know, siguro, how did they know that one is accepted and one is not? Maybe there was a fire from heaven that consumed the sacrifice of Abel. Sunog. Di ba ganun sa Bible? Si Gideon, when he offered, God would consume. The Bible is quiet. But somehow they found out, and Cain, he felt bad. He left, and God followed him and said, why are you angry? If you do what is right, God is giving us a glimpse here that something went wrong. Something is wrong with the offerer. Something is wrong with the person that offers. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Abel was right with God. And therefore, his offering was a demonstration of his faith. Kapag tama ang buhay natin, if our faith is right with God, if we are with the right standing with God, then what we offer is a demonstration of that right attitude. So it's very important that we always ask ourselves, am I right with God? Ayos ba ako sa Diyos? Because we can just offer something to God for the sake of offering, but we're not right with God. You know, there are many scriptures in the Bible that reminds us that relationship with God comes first. Diba? There are scriptures that tells that if you are bringing a gift to God and you remember that you have something wrong with your brother, leave your offering and get reconciled. You remember those verses? And how much more when we come before God and we know that we're not right with God? Do you think God can be bribed? Na masusuhulan natin ng Diyos that, oh God, if I can offer something to God, then He will forget everything between me and God. Very important, the description of Hebrews. Abel, by faith, offered God a better sacrifice. Sacrifice or offering is acceptable to God, not for its material content, but insofar as it is the outward expression of a devoted and obedient heart. God was pleased with Abel and his offering. You notice, God was pleased with Abel because he had faith in God. It's very important. It is impossible to please God without faith. That's given in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. And Abel fulfilled that. That's why God was pleased. But very important, he was pleased with Abel and his offering. He did not look with favor on Cain and his offering. We always hear from preachings and teachings, and even in the exhortations, that God does not look at what we are giving. What is important is the heart. Di ba? We hear that, no? We teach that. But now I realize it's wrong. It is wrong to say that God does not look at what we are giving. Because if you go back to Hebrews 11, Abel offered God a better. So God was also seeing that a person who is right with God will surely offer a better sacrifice than a person who is not right with God. A faith that is right with God will demonstrate and expresses it in a better way of offering, a better worshiper. So a person who is right with God becomes a better worshiper. You go back to Genesis chapter 4, Cain just brought some of the fruits, I don't know, maybe he just took some of the rotten fruits. He did not give importance to the gifts. He just got some of the fruits of the soil and offered to God. But Abel, take note of Abel, he got the fat portions and the firstborns. Not because of the offering, it is only a demonstration of a rightness of Abel in his heart, because he put his trust on God. He knows that God is the one that holds his future, and He's the one that he is trusting, and therefore Abel gave importance to God in his thanksgiving, and that's why it's demonstrated in his offering. So it is called a better sacrifice than Cain. So it's wrong to say that God does not look at what we're giving, because what we are giving is a reflection of the rightness of our heart. I'll give you an example to that. Remember David? He was trying to offer something to God. He needed a lot. And he was asking one of his men, and one of the Israelites said, "You're the king. You can just take the land." And David said, "No, I will not take something, and I will not offer something to God that cost me nothing." Even David, I'm offering to the King of Kings. I will not offer something to God that is free, that I just got from somewhere, or is a giveaway. That's how he is giving importance to God, because if the person's heart is right, then it is demonstrated in the betterness of the sacrifice. The alabaster woman. Remember the alabaster jar? A certain woman who was forgiven by Christ heard that Jesus Christ was dining with a certain person, Simon or someone, in the New Testament. And that woman with an alabaster jar said, "This is my time. I will go and honor my Lord." And she went to her room and opened her closet, and she was selecting now all the gifts, and she was thinking, what kind of gift I will offer to my Lord. You know, by nature, we reserve the best for us. We don't give the best to others. We reserve the best for us. But this woman, she opened her closet and she said, "These are the gifts I will give, I will offer, I will bless my king. What will I give? Lord, okay na tong baby cologne. Johnson's baby cologne, mahal naman eh. You know, Lord, it's the economic downturn ngayon. Mahirap ang buhay sa Singapore. Baka pwede nang ito lang muna, Lord. Kasi nga, mahirap ang buhay eh. But this woman, she opened and said, it is Jesus. I will choose the most expensive. And she broke the alabaster jar that it was so expensive that even Judas and the people in the room smell the aroma of the perfume, and they said, what a waste. It could have been sold for more than a year's wages of an ordinary laborer in those times. Why waste such kind of perfume? For others, it's a waste. But for a worshiper who is with right heart, it is a better sacrifice. You see, it's a reflection. Jesus, one time he was in the temple, he was observing. 2 people came to the Lord and offered, and the Lord said, look at that widow, that old woman, offered. Nakita ng Lord kung magkano binigay niya. Sinabi pa sa Bible kung magkano binigay eh. So Jesus would look at the offering. But the most important is if the heart is right, the offering is right. We cannot have 2 different things. No, we cannot say that my offering is right. The offering is right if the heart of the offerer is right. Abel teaches us to be a better worshiper. And it involves sacrifice on our part. We are not to simply offer God whatever happens to be around. Just like the alabaster jar of that woman, she chose it specifically for Christ because it is a reflection of the worth of the person that we are giving the gift to. You try that with your spouse. You try it. You try. Honey, it's our anniversary. Balutin mo pa ng kanong balot. Wrap it in the very nice box and give it. And then when your spouse open it, it's a mag that is give away from somewhere. Sabay ilag, ibabato sa'yo. Because it reflects on how important is the Tama ba ako or ako lang yon? Maybe God felt something wrong with you, something wrong with you, Cain. Somehow, Cain did not put his trust and hope in God. But Abel, he was not earning points. He was expressing his love and trust. Mother Teresa, the woman who lived this life for others in the poorest of the poor in India, wrote this. He said, if you give what you do not need, it isn't giving. If you give what you do not need, you're actually just clearing your garage, your storeroom. That's not giving. Tama siya eh. If you don't need it, we're actually throwing it. And sometimes we are all guilty. Donations for missions campaign, and we give all our used clothes that are no longer usable. Because if we do not need it, we're actually getting rid of it. It's not giving. Because there is no sacrifice involved. I don't know, no? I'm just curious. Maybe Cain, offering time. Itong mga manggang hilaw na ito, mga medyo bulok na ito. Tama na ito sa Diyos eh. Ito, pagkikitaan ko ba yan eh, may tiyanggi pa bukas eh. I-offer it to God. And you look at Abel, we're not right, and your heart is not right. That's why your offering is not right. Faith and a better sacrifice. Second, by faith in Hebrews 11 verse 4b, by faith, the author of Hebrews continues saying, he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. Abel's offering was accepted simply because Abel himself was first acceptable. You see, the reason why Abel's offering was accepted because he himself was first acceptable. So ayusin muna natin yung ating sarili, di ba? Tayo ba ayos sa Diyos before doing anything else? Is there a connection or a direct correlation between our faith and our giving, our offering? Yes. In the original translation, it actually means God bearing witness to Abel's offering. God was pleased and he was proud of Abel's offering, and he was saying something about it. He spoke well of the offering of Abel. I wonder that God is also speaking well of our offering, of our lives. And Lord, kaya He speaks well of me when He look at me and, anak, okay. Or does God say, tong anak kong ito, after all I have done to you, anak, I brought you to Singapore, I gave you a job, binlas kita. Ang kuripot mo eh. Ba't kaya ito ang kuripot, no? Does God speak well of us? Every time we offer our lives, our worship, our giving, then Will God say, anak, tama na, kulang na nga eh. And yet you're prioritizing me. Kulang na nga yung sweldo mo. You're prioritizing me. Lord, do you think the Lord will not open the windows of heaven and bless you? If God sees how important He is to us? Do you think God, matigas ang puso ng Diyos na gusto niya lang puro kabig, no? Do you think God's heart will not melt to see na He knows our situation and yet we know, Lord, because you're my God, I put my hope and my trust in you. And I believe that you exist and that you are a rewarder of them that diligently seek you. Lord, that's why I'm doing this, not to earn points, but because of my trust in you. It's a reflection of my faith in you, Lord, and that's why in this Abel was commended, admired as a righteous man because of his faith when God spoke well of his offerings. Just like Job, when Satan appeared before God in heaven and God said, did you consider my servant Job? God was proud and He speaks well of Job. My question is, does God speak well of us? You know that word God speaks well, it means blessed. He is blessed with us. He is pleased with us. And if God is pleased in our lives, with our lives, do you think God will not pour out His blessing upon our lives because He's so pleased with us? Minsan mahirap, no, when we offer something to God, we just give it na lang, whatever you have. We don't even consider the excellence of the one we are offering the gift to. Baliktarin natin. Alam niyo, medyo masakit pag binaliktad mo, no? Lord, I know this is my gift to you. Hindi mo pinag-isipan yung gift. Sabihin ng Lord, anak, pasensya na, medyo crisis din sa langit. Mars, I'm maintaining Mars. Moon is shrinking. Ito na lang, kung anong binigay mo sa akin, yun ang ibabalik ko sa iyo. Do you feel good about it? Will you feel like, Lord, this is 50 cents because it's economic crisis? And God will say, anak, I'm sorry, I'm also tight in my budget in the universe. 50 cents, ibabalik ko lang sa iyo, anak. Will we feel good? Because that's not the best. But why did God responded differently between the two brothers? Here's the two scriptures that we can find. Genesis 4, again, let me read. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? If you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out into the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Wow, tragic, na? That's a person who is not right with God, is only capable of doing such thing. That's why God said to Cain, you know, the blood of your brother is crying out for vengeance. And you know the story of Cain? Read it. He was cursed. That's why when we give names to our children, we only give names Abel. Because of the story, no? Because of the story about Cain. Although there's nothing wrong with the name Cain. Second verse that we can read in 1 John 3 verse 12. In the New Testament, we are given a warning. Do not be like Cain. You see, on the other hand, we are being encouraged to be like Abel. But don't be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? They answered it. He answered it because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. You see, the actions is wrong because something inside is wrong. When we are right with God, it is demonstrated in our action. No wonder James was arguing with his reader, those who claim to have faith, show it to me. Because the faith, right standing with God, will somehow affect and impact the way we live and the way we treat people and the way we respond to God and the way we approach God. So you see, the crux or the real issue is righteousness, moral uprightness. That's the real issue here. Something's wrong with the heart of this man. Abel was already right standing with God. That's why his offering was right and accepted. Remember this, we don't earn righteousness. We don't work for it. How do we become acceptable and right with God? By believing. In the Old Testament, it's a bit vague because the revelation was not complete. But in the New Testament, it has been completed and it was revealed to us that the only way for a person to be accepted before God is through the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ. For us to be accepted before God is for us to believe in Jesus. It is by grace through faith in Jesus that we become accepted before God, acceptable before God. So that's the first thing. That's maybe the reason why everything that we do are wasted or is not prospering, simply because we are not starting it right. We have to start it right by making our hearts right with God. And that is by putting our trust in Jesus. Because in the Mount of Transfiguration, the Father said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Listen to Him." And Hebrews 11 says, "Without faith, it is impossible." No matter how hard you try, no matter how good you become, it is impossible to please God without faith, without putting your trust and your hope in the promises of God. And believing that He exists and that He is the rewarder of them who earnestly, you don't just believe, you continue seeking Him and getting to know God. Have you put your trust in Jesus? That's the first step. Make our hearts right with God. Settle your issues with God first. Come before the Lord. Put your trust in Jesus. That's the first step. That's the beginning of everything. Because if we are accepted, then everything will be acceptable as a demonstration of that faith or right standing with God. And finally, the last line in Hebrews 11 verse 4, if you will notice, it's interesting that in the Bible, there was no record that Abel spoke or said something. There was no record that it says Abel said. There's nothing. No record of Abel speaking. But it is interesting to note that Abel, even though he did not say any word or no written word was given in the New Testament or Old Testament, but this is the description of Abel, and by faith, he still speaks even though he is dead. There was no record of him talking or speaking, and yet he is speaking even though he is dead. What was the message of Abel? What is Abel saying to all of us? How does Abel speak today? By faith and by his example, by his life, and by the demonstration of his trust in God. Abel is dead, but his faith is a living voice to remind those that will approach God that we cannot approach God on our own terms. That we cannot just go before God just by or offer something that we don't consider being right with God first. Our faith life is actually the legacy that we leave behind, not just for our children, but also for our friends and to the world that is watching us. Abel is dead, but he still speaks today. But take note of this. It is not the blood of Abel that speaks today. Because the blood of Abel cries for vengeance and it was already completed. It is the faith of Abel that speaks today. And I wonder, we will all maybe transfer to another country, or maybe someday, somehow, when we leave this world, what kind of message do we leave behind? When our names are remembered by our families, our children, what kind of message are we leaving behind? What legacy? Are we living a legacy of faith and trust and hope in God, looking for the promises of God in the future, even we don't see it yet we believe it? That's why we put our trust and believe that God is the rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. You know, only time will determine how you and I will be remembered in this world. By our friends, by our children, our family, and by the world that we're living in. You know, Abel's life was acceptable, or his offerings, because he was acceptable first. He was accepted first by God. And this is the reminder of Abel. That first and foremost, Abel stands for being approved by God. Abel is giving us an example, a message of seek the approval of God first. That's very important. Before anything else, seek to be approved by God. That God says, anak, okay ka, okay tayo. We know it in our hearts, no? Kung okay tayo sa Diyos. Because when we are approved by God, when we are accepted by God, then it results to be a better worshiper. We become a better person. We become a better worshiper. We become a better offerer simply because we're right with God. You see, we just don't give God anything that is around. Because we're right with God, we have the approval of God, then it is demonstrated in the way we offer and the way we approach and treat God and live our lives. And you see Abel's life as an example of faith for many of us. Read the Bible and there are many warnings. Don't follow the ways of Cain. He didn't even make it to the hall of the faithfuls in Hebrews 11, but Abel was the first one to be described and commended as righteous. I hope someday we will be remembered by the example of our faith. Mga office mate po ninyo, later on you'll be transferred to another work. May they remember your example of life. That even hindi na kayo magkakasama, they will remember every time the name is mentioned. What kind of legacy we leave behind. So I hope, and I pray, and I challenge each and every one of us, let's go back to the first step and ask ourselves, are we acceptable? Is our life acceptable to God? Because if our lives is not acceptable, then everything is not acceptable. You see, that's the real issue here. Amen?